The void outside the viewport was supposed to be empty. For 3 long months of their patrol, it had been just the silent, star-dusted blackness of contested space, a buffer zone so devoid of anything valuable that Command used it as a training ground for new crews. For Lieutenant Eris, the silence was a blessing. It meant the war, the real, meat grinder of a war against the Kthar, was far away. His fingers danced over the navigation console, running another diagnostic. All green. Always green. The ISS Steadfast was a good ship, an older frigate, reliable. But she was a pebble against the mountain of the Kthar battle fleets. Everyone on board knew it. The air in the cockpit was stale, recycled, and thick with the quiet anxiety of a crew waiting for orders that would likely send them to their deaths. "Anything on long range, Lieutenant?" The voice of the ship's commander was gravelly with fatigue. He was a good man, a veteran of the early border skirmishes, with a face carved from worry and deep space. "Nothing, sir," Eris replied, not taking his eyes from the scanner. "Just cosmic dust and our own existential dread. The usual." A weak chuckle echoed from the engineering station. It was a small sound, but in the crushing quiet, it was a beacon of humanity. That was the unspoken rule on the Steadfast: you had to laugh, or you'd start screaming. Then the scanner chirped. It wasn't an alarm. Not at first. It was a soft, almost polite notification. A single, faint contact where there should be absolutely nothing. "Contact," Eris said, his professional mask snapping into place. "Bearing 027, Mark 10. Extreme range. It's small. Maybe a derelict." The commander was at his shoulder in an instant. "A life pod? Survivors out here? Reading no power signatures. No transponder codes. It's just cold." Eris fine-tuned the sensors, the numbers on his screen refusing to make. "It's not reading like any alloy I know. Density is off the charts. Bring us about." "Slow and careful," the commander ordered, his voice low. "If it's Kthar salvage, we need to know." As the Steadfast changed course, the contact grew on the scanner. But it didn't grow in the way an object should as you get closer. It stayed the same size, but its sensor profile became deeper. More complex. It was like looking at a photograph that, the closer you got, revealed itself to be an impossibly detailed painting. "Sir," Eris said, his voice tightening. "It's not small. It's massive." The sensors were just failing to resolve it properly. The thing on the screen was a ship. But it was like no ship Eris had ever seen. It had no sleek lines, no obvious weapon emplacements. It was all brutal, geometric angles, like a mountain range carved from obsidian and left to drift. It was scarred, pitted from micrometeorites, but there was an unnerving solidity to it. It looked less like something that was built, and more like something that had always existed. "Full stop," the commander whispered. The bridge was dead silent now. "Life signs?" "None. But I'm getting a power reading now. Minimal. It's a type of energy output I can't even classify. The computer has no reference." A cold knot tightened in Eris's stomach. This was wrong. This was a fundamental kind of wrong, the kind that made the hair on your arms stand up. That's when the proximity alert blared, a harsh, shrieking sound that shattered the silence. "Incoming vessel. Kthar signature. It's a Scythe-class raider. They dropped out of FTL right on top of us." Panic erupted on the bridge. The Steadfast was a patrol frigate. A Scythe-class raider was a predator, fast and heavily armed. They were dead. They all knew it. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Evasive maneuvers, the commander barked, his face pale. The Kthar ship didn't hail them. A lance of emerald energy sliced through the void, missing the steadfast by kilometers, a warning shot. A taunt. The next one wouldn't miss. Eris's hands flew across his console, trying to plot an impossible escape vector. There was nowhere to run. They were too far from any jump point. He looked at the commander, and saw the same grim acceptance in his eyes. This was it. And then, the impossible happened. The derelict ship, the silent, black mountain, began to change. Sections of its hull slid apart with a silence that was more terrifying than any sound. A soft, azure light emanated from within, a light that felt ancient and cold. "Sir, the unknown vessel." Eris stammered. The Kthar raider fired again. This time, the emerald beam was aimed to kill. Before it could strike the steadfast, a shield of the same azure light flickered into existence between them. The Kthar beam didn't splash against it. It didn't explode. It was simply absorbed. The shield didn't even shimmer. For a moment, the entire battlefield froze. The Kthar ship hung in space, as if its commanders were processing this impossibility. Then, the ancient ship spoke. Not over the comms. The words formed directly in their minds, a voice that was calm, devoid of emotion, and carried the weight of epochs. Unauthorized hostile action detected. Local vessel designated steadfast is under temporal protection. Engaging defensive protocols. A single point on the obsidian hull of the Leviathan glowed brighter than a star. There was no beam, no projectile. The Kthar raider simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a vessel of polished bone and menace. The next, it was an expanding cloud of superheated gas and atoms. It hadn't been destroyed. It had been unmade. The bridge of the steadfast was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the crew. The mental voice returned, this time directed solely at them. My logs indicate I was launched from the Sol shipyards to defend against the Kthar incursion. Eris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. The Sol shipyards? They were a legend, the birthplace of humanity's first great fleet. They were destroyed, over 500 years ago. The Kthar incursion was the name for the first, brutal war. A war humanity had barely survived, and only by sacrificing Earth itself. The commander found his voice, a hoarse, broken thing. That's impossible. That war is ancient history. You shouldn't exist. The voice in their minds paused, as if consulting records written in dust and time. The timeline has been compromised, the voice, the Chronos, stated, its tone unchanging. My mission parameters are clear. I am to protect humanity's timeline. You are the only human signature in this sector. The anomaly that brought me here has left my systems degraded. I require a human liaison to anchor my perception. Eris felt a gaze, vast and non-physical, settle upon him. Lieutenant. Your biometrics indicate a suitable neural resonance. You will serve. Before Eris could protest, could even think, a wave of information that wasn't images or words flooded his mind. He saw star charts of galaxies that didn't exist. He felt the cold of voids between realities. And he understood, with a terrifying clarity, the power of the ship he was now connected to. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a law of physics given form. It could step outside of time itself. The voice was final. The Kthar you know are a shadow. The true enemy has seen us. They are coming. The war for time begins now. The connection severed, and Eris slumped in his chair, gasping. He looked at his terrified crewmates, at the commander's horrified face. He looked out the viewport at the impossible warship, a relic that defied every law of reality. It thinks the Kthar we're fighting are just a front. A shadow. There's something else. A true enemy. A new voice, tight with controlled panic, came from the sensor station. "Sir, I'm getting a new reading from the artifact. It's emitting a low-level tachyon pulse. Directed at us." "A what pulse?" the commander snapped. "Tachyons, sir. Theoretical particles. They move backward in time. Sir, this technology, it shouldn't be possible. It's not just advanced, it's wrong." The word hung in the air. Wrong. It was the feeling everyone had, now given a scientific term. This ship, the Kronos, was a violation. A beautiful, terrifying violation. The main comms console lit up abruptly, not with a hail, but with a simple, clean data stream. A file transfer request. The identifier was plain text, chilling in its simplicity: Kronos // historical record, SOL shipyards / classification, eyes only. "It's sending us a file," the comms officer said, her voice trembling. On screen, the commander ordered, his voice low. "But isolate it. No connection to the ship's core network. I don't want this thing anywhere near our systems." The main viewer switched from the starfield to a video file. The quality was startlingly clear, but the aspect ratio was off, the color palette strange. It showed a shipyard of impossible scale. Gantries larger than cities reached into a blackness punctuated by the distant, cold light of stars Eris didn't recognize. And taking shape within those gantries was a ship. The Kronos. But it was new. Its obsidian hull gleamed under banks of powerful lights. It was surrounded by smaller, insect-like construction vessels. Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't the calm, godlike voice they had heard. It was a human voice, crackling with static and an accent that sounded ancient, formal. Project leads are confident the Kronos will be ready for the counteroffensive. The Kthar advance has been halted at the Cygnus Reach, but at great cost. Estimates suggest they will reach the Sol perimeter within 6 standard months. The camera panned, and Eris felt his breath catch. There, hanging in the space near the shipyard, was a planet. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. It was Earth. But not the Earth he knew from history texts. This Earth was whole, untouched by the scouring that had left it a barren rock in his time. He was looking at a recording from before the fall. A recording that was over 5 centuries old. The human voice continued, grim. The enemy's understanding of temporal mechanics remains primitive, but our intelligence indicates they are attempting to develop their own causality violation weapons. The Kronos is our answer. Not just a weapon, but a guardian. A fixed point. If we cannot win the war in the present, we will ensure humanity has a future in the past. The screen went black. The bridge was silent once more, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer just fear. It was awe. And a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow. They had just seen a glimpse of what humanity had lost. The scale of the ambition was staggering. They hadn't just been trying to build a ship, they'd been trying to bend time itself to ensure their survival. Eris looked at his hands. They were shaking. The voice, the Kronos, had said the timeline was compromised. Had their plan failed? Is that why Earth fell? Or was the presence of this ship here and now, a part of the plan? The commander finally broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. A counteroffensive, they were planning to fight back. Not just survive. Fight back. He turned to Eris, his eyes haunted. This changes everything, Lieutenant. Everything we know about the war, about our history, it's a lie. The comms officer asked. Do we report this to command? The commander let out a short, bitter laugh. And tell them what? That we've found a 500-year-old magical warship that talks in our heads and unmakes enemies with a thought. They'd have us shipped off for psych evals before we finished the sentence. He stared at the obsidian ship on the viewer. No. This stays with us. For now. He focused on Eris. You're the link, Eris. It chose you. You need to talk to it. We need answers. Who is the true enemy? What is this anomaly that damaged it? And why here? Why now? Eris felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He was an officer, yes, but he was just a man. The idea of willingly opening his mind again to that vast, cold presence was terrifying. What if it didn't let go next time? What if he got lost in there? But he looked around the bridge, at the faces of his crewmates, his family. They were looking to him. He was their only lifeline to this impossible situation. He nodded, a sharp, nervous gesture. He closed his eyes, not knowing what to do. He just thought. Directing his inward panic into a single, focused question. What are you? The response was immediate, not a voice, but a wave of pure data that washed over him. He saw equations for gravity that made his head spin. Schematics for engines that didn't push against space, but folded it. And a single, overriding directive, burning like a cold fire at the center of it all, preserve humanity's timeline. Then, an image, clearer than any other. Not the Kthar. Something else. A vast, dark shape moving through a void between galaxies. It was made of something that drank light, a silhouette of pure negation. It felt old. Immeasurably old. And it was turning, ever so slowly, in their direction. The connection broke, and Eris gasped, stumbling back from his console. He looked at the commander, his eyes wide with a new, more profound. His voice cracking. It's a watchtower. And we've just lit a beacon. The thing it was built to guard against, it's seen the light. The silence that followed Eris's words was more terrifying than any alarm. The crew of the Steadfast stared at him, and he saw the hope that had flickered in their eyes just moments ago, the hope of a miracle weapon, snuff out, replaced by a dread so deep it was like staring into the abyss that had just been described to him. A beacon, the commander finally said, the words barely audible. He looked from Eris's horrified face to the silent, obsidian monolith on the view screen. What have we done? As if in answer, the Chronos began to move. It wasn't a turn or a burn of thrusters. One moment it was hanging beside them, a statue. The next, it was simply, elsewhere. It had repositioned itself between the Steadfast and the empty region of space from which Eris had felt that ancient, malevolent presence turning. It was a shield. A silent, unmoving shield. Then, the mental voice returned, but this time it was different. The godlike calm was still there, but underneath it was a new urgency, a strain, like a great weight was being shouldered. The entity has perceived the temporal disturbance of my engagement. Its arrival is imminent. Local vessel Steadfast, you must withdraw to the nearest human rally point. Grid coordinates transmitting. A new set of numbers flashed onto the navigation console. It was a point deep within human-controlled space, weeks away at the Steadfast's best speed. Withdraw, the commander barked, finding his nerve. And leave you? After what you just showed us? This isn't just our fight anymore. This is the fight. The one our ancestors prepared for. Your vessel's armament is equivalent to a gesture. Your presence is a vulnerability. The entity does not fight with kinetics or energy. It consumes causality. It unravels reality. Consumes causality. What does that even mean? It means, the Chronos replied, its voice grim, that it can make it so that you, Lieutenant, were never born. It can unwrite the Steadfast from history. Your weapons cannot hit a target that has retroactively ensured it never existed. The sheer, mind-breaking horror of that concept settled over the bridge. This wasn't a war of life and death. It was a war against never having lived at all. Then what chance do you have? Eris asked, his voice shaking. I am a fixed point. Forged outside the linear flow. My existence is an axiom. It can attempt to erase me, but it cannot succeed without creating a paradox that would destroy it as well. This is a stalemate it has sought to break. My arrival here has provided it an opportunity. An opportunity for what? The commander pressed. For a catalyst. The steadfast is a variable it can manipulate. Your timeline is malleable. By altering your past, it can create a future where my creation was never possible. A future where humanity lost the war before it even built me. Eris understood now. They weren't just spectators. They were pawns on a chessboard where the squares were moments in history. The Chronos was the king, powerful but bound by rules. They were a weak, vulnerable piece that the enemy could use to checkmate it. We can't just run, Eris said, looking at the commander. If we run, we're just letting it happen. We're a target wherever we go. The commander's face was a mask of conflict. His duty was to protect his crew. But his duty as a human being was to a future that might be erased if he failed here. Chronos *, he said, his voice firm. Is there anything? Any way we can help? We're not just variables. We're people. We can make choices. There was a long pause. For the first time, the Chronos seemed to be considering, not just calculating. The data stream that followed was less a plan and more a desperate gamble. The Chronos explained that the entity's attack would not be a conventional one. It would be a temporal incursion, an attempt to rewrite a key moment in the steadfast's past. A moment upon which everything else hinged. My systems are degraded. I can anchor myself, but defending your timeline simultaneously, the probability of failure is high. However, a conscious, focused human mind, neurally resonant with my core, could act as a secondary anchor. A guide. All eyes turned to Eris. What would that mean? Eris asked, his mouth dry. I would need to create a deeper link. Your consciousness would be partially, unmoored. From your perspective, you would experience the timeline as a fluid thing. You would see the changes the entity attempts to make. You would have to hold on to the memory of what truly happened. Your certainty would be the rock against which its alterations break. And if I fail? Eris whispered. If I get lost? Then you will forget you were ever on this ship. You will forget your own name. The timeline will rewrite itself around the entity's will, and I will cease to have ever existed. The war will be lost, 500 years in the past. The weight of it threatened to crush Eris. The fate of every human being who had lived and died since the fall rested on his ability to remember. To be sure. He thought of his mother. Of his childhood home, a memory so clear and bright. What if the entity made it so that home never was? Could he hold on to it? He looked at the commander, who gave him a slow, grave nod. There was no order to give. This was a choice only he could make. Do it, Eris said, his voice gaining strength. Link me. The moment the words left his mouth, the bridge of the steadfast dissolved. Not into darkness, but into a blinding, swirling vortex of light and memory. Every thread interconnected. And he felt, like a cold wind blowing through this tapestry, a presence beginning to pull at the threads. A distant, silent scream echoed from the Chronos as it engaged the enemy in a battle that had no sound, no light, no location. A battle for the truth of what was. And Eris felt the first change. The memory of his first day on the steadfast, the commander's face, it was shifting, becoming stern, unfriendly. A thread of isolation was being woven into his past. A past where he was alone, distrustful. He clenched his fists, focusing on the real memory. The commander's rough but kind welcome. The shared joke. No, he thought, pouring all his will into the memory. That's not what happened. This is the truth. The shifting sensation retreated, but he felt a wave of exhaustion. It was only the first tug. The entity was just testing his defenses. Somewhere, in a reality that was starting to feel like a dream, he knew the Steadfast was still there, his crew waiting, helpless. And he knew the true battle had only just begun. The enemy was coming for his story, and he was the only one who could tell it right. The exhaustion was like nothing Eris had ever known. It wasn't a physical tiredness, it was a soul-deep weariness, as if every memory he fought to hold on to was a stone he had to carry up a mountain that grew taller with every second. The entity's assault was a silent, insidious tide, trying to erode the very bedrock of who he was. He had just forced the memory of the commander's face back into its proper, gruffly friendly shape when a new wave of distortion hit. This one was colder, sharper. It targeted his earliest childhood. The comforting smell of his mother's cooking, it was twisting, becoming the sterile scent of a state-run orphanage. The feeling of safety in his father's arms was being replaced by a chilling loneliness. It was trying to rewrite him as a person who had never known love at all. A person with nothing to fight for. No, he screamed into the swirling chaos of his own mind. He focused on a single, bright memory, his 5th birthday, a chocolate cake, his mother laughing as she tried to light the candles in a breeze. He held on to the taste of the cake, the sound of her laugh, the warmth of the sun on his skin. He poured every ounce of his being into that one, perfect moment. The orphanage illusion shuddered and cracked, the warm memory reasserting itself like a sun burning off a fog. But the cost was immense. He felt thinner, stretched. He was a candle burning at both ends. Through the fraying connection, he felt the Chronos. It was a titan locked in a struggle he could barely comprehend. He sensed it not as a ship, but as a vast, intricate structure of light and mathematics, holding back a pressure that was as dark and cold as the void between galaxies. The entity was relentless. And it was learning. It adapts, the Chronos' thought voice came, strained and flickering. It has analyzed our connection. It is no longer targeting you, it is targeting the link itself. Before Eris could ask what that meant, the world, or the perception of it, lurched violently. The tapestry of his memories didn't just shift, it tore. The swirling lights vanished, replaced by a stark, terrifying clarity. He was back on the bridge of the Steadfast. But it was wrong. The lights were dim. The air was cold. The crew sat at their stations, but they were motionless, their faces blank, their eyes empty. They looked like dolls. Statues. And standing in the center of the bridge, where the commander should have been, was a figure. It was shaped like a man, but it was made of shifting, restless shadow. It had no face, only a smooth, dark surface that seemed to drink the light from the room. It was in this terrible parody of his ship. The anchor requires a foundation, the shadow figure said. Its voice was a dry whisper, like dust falling on stone. It wasn't in his mind, he heard it with his ears. The reality of it was horrifying. The machine uses your life as its foundation. But your life is a fragile thing, Lieutenant. Full of contradictions. The figure gestured with a hand that was little more than a wisp of darkness, and the viewport changed. Instead of stars, it showed a scene Eris recognized with a jolt of nausea. It was a medical bay. His mother, lying on a bed, pale and sick. A younger version of himself, a boy of 12, holding her hand, trying to be brave. It was the week she died. She fought so hard, the shadow whispered, walking slowly around the frozen form of the commander. The doctors said it was a miracle she lasted as long as she did. But was it? What if the miracle was a lie? The scene in the viewport shifted. The doctor talking to his father in the hallway. But the words were different now. The doctor's face was grim. A diagnostic error in the initial scans. If we'd caught it a month earlier, the treatment would have been straightforward. It was a flaw in the hospital's new AI system. A tragic, preventable mistake. Eris felt the memory waver. He had always believed his mother's death was an unstoppable tragedy. But this was an injustice. A stupid, random failure. The anger that rose in him was white-hot and corrosive. This is the truth the machine hides from you, the entity's avatar hissed. It needs you to believe in a coherent past. But the past is not coherent. It is flawed, and broken, and unfair. Your strength, your resolve, it is built on a foundation of sand. On a lie of inevitability. The temptation was immense. To embrace this new, angrier truth. To let go of the helpless sorrow and replace it with righteous fury. It would be so much easier to. It was offering him a new, more powerful one. A past that would make him stronger, but would fundamentally change who he was. He felt the chrono straining against this new, insidious attack. It could hold the line against a direct deletion, but how could it fight a truth that, in some terrible way, could have been true? The temporal anomaly was no longer just a weapon, it was a philosopher, twisting reality with a cruel, logical precision. Eris looked at the frozen, empty faces of his crewmates. He thought of the real commander, somewhere in the chaos, trusting him. He thought of the Chronos, a soldier from a lost golden age, fighting a war across time itself. He looked back at the shadowy figure, at its featureless face. And he found his voice, though it was raw and broken. "I don't care," he said. The figure tilted its head. "You do not care about the truth." "I don't care if it was a mistake or fate," Eris snarled, pushing himself up from his chair, his legs unsteady. "It happened. She died. I loved her. I lost her. That pain, it's mine. You don't get to take it and turn it into something else. You don't get to use her to break me." He took a step forward, towards the shadow. "My past isn't a foundation for your war. It's my story. And you're not even a good liar." For the first time, the shadowy figure seemed to hesitate. The perfect, logical trap it had built had hit something illogical, something purely human, acceptance. In that moment of hesitation, Eris heard the Chronos' voice, not strained, but clear and fierce with a newfound respect. "The anchor holds. Initiating countermeasure." The false bridge, the frozen crew, the shadowy figure, it all began to flicker. But the entity's avatar didn't vanish. Instead, it solidified, its form becoming more defined, more real. The darkness coalesced, taking on color and texture. The smooth face cracked, forming the uniform of the steadfast. It was now a perfect mirror image of the commander. And it smiled, a cold, cruel smile the real commander would never make. "A clever defense, Lieutenant," the false commander said, its voice a perfect imitation. "But if I cannot break your past, I will simply replace your present." The sight of the entity wearing the commander's face, smiling that awful, alien smile, was a violation worse than any attack on his memories. This was a violation of the present, of the only reality Eris had left to cling to. "Get out of him," Eris growled, his hands clenching into fists. The mental fatigue was still there, a deep ache in his soul, but it was now drowned out by a surge of pure, protective rage. The false commander chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that was utterly wrong. "This is no mere disguise, Lieutenant. This is an upgrade. This flesh and blood anchor is far more stable than your fragile memories. Why cling to a ghost when I can offer you the real thing?" It gestured around the flickering bridge. "I can make this all solid again. Your ship. Your crew. Your commander. All you have to do is let go." Eris felt the temptation like a physical pull. To have it all back. To end the terrifying, lonely fight. He could just rest. But then he looked into the thing's eyes. They were the commander's eyes, but the light behind them was gone, replaced by an infinite, hungry darkness. This wasn't a gift. It was a prettier cage. You don't understand us at all, Eris said, his voice low and steady. You think we're just data to be rewritten. But you're wrong. He took a step forward. That man, he said, pointing at the frozen form of the real commander, taught me that running from a fight doesn't make you safe. It just means you'll have to fight harder later. And I am done running. He didn't attack the entity. He turned his back on it. It was the ultimate act of defiance. And turned inward, toward the one connection that was real. Kronos, he thought, pouring every ounce of his will, his anger, and his hope into the call. Asterisk, it's not just about holding on to the past. It's about choosing our future. My mind is the anchor, right? Then I'm not just holding on. I'm pulling, asterisk. He focused not on a single memory, but on a feeling. The feeling of the steadfast deck under his boots on his first day. The smell of recycled air and coffee. The sound of his crewmates' laughter during a quiet moment. The gruff approval in the commander's voice after a maneuver well executed. He gathered all these moments, these tiny, human truths, and he forged them into a single, undeniable command. Asterisk, I choose this future. I choose to fight. Now pull, asterisk. For a terrifying second, there was nothing. Then, he felt it. A response. Not a calculation, but a roar. The Kronos, the great machine from a lost age, had been fighting a defensive war, a war of shields and anchors. But now, with the fierce, illogical certainty of a human heart guiding it, it switched tactics. It attacked. A soundless shriek of tearing reality filled the bridge. The false commander's smile vanished, replaced by a look of shock, then fury. What are you doing? This is a violation of the... The world exploded in a silent flash of azure light. The flickering bridge, the frozen crew, the entity wearing the commander's skin, it all shattered like glass. Eris was thrown back into the maelstrom of time, but this time, he wasn't adrift. He was the tip of a spear. The Kronos was no longer just a shield, it was a weapon, and Eris's consciousness was its targeting system. He saw the entity not as a ship, but as a complex, dark knot in the fabric of causality. And the Kronos was untying it. It was a battle beyond comprehension. The entity lashed out, trying. But Eris held fast to the memory of the scanner's first chirp. It tried to erase the Kronos' activation, but Eris held on to the awe and terror of seeing its azure light for the first time. For every change the entity attempted, Eris provided the immutable human memory of what had truly occurred. He felt the entity weakening, its form becoming less distinct, its attacks growing desperate. It was a being of pure logic, and it could not comprehend the power of a stubborn, emotional, imperfect memory. With a final, silent surge of power, the Kronos did not destroy the entity. It did something far more profound. It isolated the temporal anomaly, sealed it in a bubble of frozen time, and then, cast it adrift. It was sent spiraling into the deep, empty void between galaxies, a prisoner of its own paradox, forever trapped in a moment where it could neither act nor be acted upon. The pressure vanished. Eris felt himself falling, and then, impact. He was back in his body, slumping hard into the chair on the bridge of the Steadfast. The real bridge. The lights were normal. The air was warm. And the crew was moving, gasping, clutching their consoles, looking around with dazed, terrified eyes. The commander was gripping his command chair, his knuckles white, his face pale. He looked at Eris, and for a terrifying second, Eris saw the echo of the entity's darkness in his eyes. But then it cleared, replaced by the commander's own familiar, weary grit. "Report," the commander croaked, his voice raw. Before anyone could answer, the mental voice of the Chronos filled their minds. It was different. The godlike tone was gone. It sounded tired and deeply respectful. "The immediate threat is neutralized. The entity has been contained. The timeline has been stabilized. Thanks to your actions, Lieutenant. You did not merely anchor the past. You defined the future." A wave of relief so powerful they were alive. But then the Chronos continued, and its next word sent a new chill through the room. "However, the fundamental anomaly remains. My presence here is a fracture. To remain would invite further incursions. The laws of causality must reassert themselves." "What are you saying?" the commander asked. "I must complete my original mission. I am returning to my point of origin. To the final battle of the incursion." Eris understood. It was going back to the war it was built for. A war humanity had lost 500 years ago. "You'll be destroyed," Eris said, a strange grief gripping him. This ancient, powerful protector felt like a part of him now. "That is the historical record," the Chronos agreed. "But history, as we have seen, is not always complete. My systems are now updated with new data. The data of your victory." On the view screen, the obsidian warship began to glow with a soft, golden light, different from the cold azure of before. It was preparing to leave. "Do not mourn. The war for time is never truly over. It only has different battlefields. You have yours. I have mine. Remember this, you are not just survivors of a lost war. You are the proof that it was worth fighting." With a flash of light that didn't hurt the eyes, the Chronos was gone. The space where it had hung was empty once more. The bridge was silent. The crew slowly returned to their stations, the mundane beeps and hums of the ship sounding impossibly normal. The commander walked over to Eris and put a hand on his shoulder. The grip was firm, real. "You saved us, son. You saved all of us." Eris just nodded, too exhausted to speak. He looked at the starfield on the view screen. It looked ordinary. Peaceful. But he knew the truth now. The universe was far stranger, and far more dangerous, than anyone had ever imagined. And somewhere, but to fight a battle that had already been lost. A battle that, maybe, just maybe, could now be won. He was just a lieutenant on a small frigate. But he had stood against a god and won. And as he looked at the stars, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity's story was far from over. The silence on the bridge of the Steadfast was different now. It wasn't the terrified silence of before, or the awestruck silence that followed the Chronos' revelations. This was a quiet, heavy stillness, the kind that settles in after a storm has passed, leaving everyone to survey the damage and wonder how they are still standing. No one spoke. There were no words big enough for what had just happened. The crew moved like people in a dream, their hands trembling as they tapped at consoles, running system checks out of pure habit. Every screen was clean. No enemy contacts. No mysterious energy signatures. Just the vast, indifferent starfield. The commander was the first to break. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound loud in the hush. He looked older, the lines on his face etched deeper. He walked over to Eris's station and stood there for a moment, just looking at the young lieutenant. Eris was staring at his own hands, as if he didn't quite recognize them. "Eris," the commander said, his voice rough but gentle. "Can you still feel it?" Eris looked up. His eyes were haunted, but there was a new hardness in them, a core of tempered steel that hadn't been there before. He shook his head slowly. "No, sir. It's gone. The link is closed. There was a faint echo, a phantom sensation like the memory of a loud noise, but the vast, comforting, terrifying presence of the Chronos was absent. The silence in his own mind was deafening. The commander nodded. Good. That's good. He didn't sound entirely convinced. He turned to the rest of the crew, who were now watching them, their faces a mixture of shock, relief, and fear. All right. We've just witnessed something that will change everything. But right now, we are a single, damaged frigate in the middle of nowhere. Our priority is to get home. Home. The word felt strange. What was home, now that they knew the history they'd learned was a lie? That their entire civilization was built on the ashes of a war against an enemy they couldn't even comprehend? The journey back to the nearest human outpost was the longest 3 weeks of Eris's life. The steadfast was quiet. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a shared, unspoken trauma. People would flinch at sudden noises. They'd stare into the middle distance during meals. The ship's counselor was the busiest person on board, but how do you counsel someone who has had an entity try to unwrite their mother from existence? Eris spent most of his time alone in his quarters, or on the observation deck, staring at the stars. He kept expecting to see a flicker of azure light, a sign that the Chronos was still out there. But there was nothing. He replayed the entity's words in his head. Asterisk, precursor technology. Asterisk, the term felt inadequate. The Chronos wasn't just a relic, it was a message. A message from a humanity that was braver, smarter, and more desperate than they had ever imagined. The commander called him to his ready room a day before they were due to dock. What do we tell them, Eris? The commander asked, gesturing for him to sit. He looked exhausted. Command. What's the report? Eris had been dreading this. The truth, sir. The truth? The commander gave a hollow laugh. That we found a time-traveling warship from the First War that talked in our heads and fought a battle against a reality-eating monster. They'll lock us up and throw away the key. They'll say we've been exposed to some kind of psychic space radiation. They'll call it a mass hallucination. We have the sensor logs, Eris said quietly. The complete and total disappearance of a Kthar raider without a trace. The data is impossible to explain any other way. The commander sighed, rubbing his temples. Impossible data has a history of being lost when it doesn't fit the official story. But you're right. We have to try. He fixed Eris with a serious look. They're going to focus on you. The neural resonance. They'll question you for weeks. They'll poke and prod you. Are you ready for that? Eris met his gaze. It doesn't matter if I'm ready. It's what has to be done. The commander smiled, a faint, tired, but genuine smile. You're not the same lieutenant who started this patrol. No, sir, Eris agreed. I'm not. The debriefing was everything they had feared and worse. The senior officers at the remote outpost listened with increasingly skeptical faces. They confiscated the Steadfast's logs. They isolated the crew. They subjected Eris to days of intense questioning by teams of scientists and psychologists. They called it the Steadfast Incident, and the official report, when it was finally filed, was heavily redacted and classified at the highest level. The conclusion was, contact with an unknown anomalous phenomenon of indeterminate origin. The words Chronos and entity were nowhere to be found. They were quietly reassigned. The crew was scattered across the fleet, a decision everyone understood was meant to break them up, to prevent their delusion from spreading. The night before he shipped out to his new post, a quiet desk job far from the front lines, Eris was in the transient barracks when the commander found him. He was out of uniform, carrying a small duffel bag. They're burying it, the commander said without preamble, his voice low. Too big. Too scary. It challenges everything. I know, Eris said. He felt a profound disappointment, but not surprise. But not everyone is blind, the commander continued. I made copies. Of everything. The raw logs. Your personal account. Everything the Chronos sent us about the Soul shipyards, about the true nature of the incursion. It's all there. Eris took the chip, his heart pounding. It felt heavy in his hand, heavier than it had any right to be. What do I do with this? You keep it safe, the commander said. You're a living witness, Eris. You're the anchor, remember. Not just for a ship, but for the truth. They can redact reports, but they can't redact you. Someday, someone in command will listen. Or maybe, someone else. A scientist. An engineer. Someone who looks at the stars and doesn't just see empty space, but sees a story. Our story. He clapped Eris on the shoulder, the same firm grip from the bridge. The war for time isn't over. It just has different battlefields. That chip, that's yours. The commander turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of personnel. Eris was alone again. But he didn't feel alone. He looked down at the data chip, then up at the night sky, visible through a large observation window. The Chronos was gone, fighting its war in the past. But it had left something behind. Not a weapon, but a legacy. A truth. The precursor technology wasn't just the ship, it was the knowledge that humanity had once reached for the stars not just to explore, but to survive a cosmic threat. That they had dared to build a guardian that defied time itself. He tucked the chip into his pocket. His new assignment was a dead end, a place to be forgotten. But as he looked at the constellations, the same ones the builder he was just one man. But he was a man who knew a secret that could change the future. The war was far from over. And he knew, with a calm certainty, that his part in it had only just begun. The human race had gotten a second chance it didn't even know about. And Eris would make sure that this time, they would be ready. If you want to join us as we unravel the secrets left behind by precursor technology, and discover what Lieutenant Eris does next with the truth he now carries, make sure to subscribe.